Welcome back then, and hopefully you've now uploaded your activity where you identified some data that your organisation keeps and uses and what type of data it is. And we'll move on from there by thinking about, as we started to outline in part one, the volume of data that organisations are now storing and using has increased massively. Because every time customers now conduct a search, complete a purchase, visit a website, respond to a survey, or comment on social media, this adds to the vast amount of information that's now available. This information can be a valuable asset to the organisation, but only if they know how to tap into it to extract the bits that are relevant and useful, and that they analyse it correctly, and also, and we'll look at this later, store it safely. Recent studies have identified that this glut of data, as they call it, is crippling some organisations. Some reports say their management are just being overwhelmed. 61% of managers reported in a recent survey that the information overloaded data in their workplace was too much. This glut causes the latest information sometimes to be ignored or missed, or the decision-making process not to use it. It can simply be because they have not had the means to transform that data into actionable information, so they can't work it out and understand it. They're swamped by info and then didn't recognise which was the most significant or the newest, so they were overloaded, and then they dismissed it totally because they were too busy, so they didn't even consider it because they just couldn't. So the question would have to be, what decisions could the organisation improve on if they had used the relevant data? And the management of the data is key, so that we can utilise that in its various forms. And you need, or the organisation needs, a strategic implementation of data management and technology. This can ensure that the organisation is in a position to improve consistency and efficiency, increase productivity, identify areas for collaboration and communication, and make faster and better informed decisions. So with this glut of data, what are some of the areas that technology can be used to help us capture, analyse the data, and make it easier for the organisation to use that data to expand their business? Well, there are some simple data management initiatives that can help. They'll give us compliance, they'll give us smoother understanding, and therefore efficiency in using that data. And technology can help in that way because it can be used to decide where it's coming from, sort of identifying and mapping it, because we said before it's coming from a massive amount of different sources, and it can be in an unstructured or structured format. If it's in a structured format, that's going to be data that is highly organized and information that can easily be indexed, uploaded, stored on databases, in spreadsheets, and it can be easily detected by search operations and algorithms, so it can all be sorted out, because structural data usually consists of objective, numerical information that doesn't really require any interpretation until you actually use it. Examples of that could be transactional data from sales, etc., point of sale transactions. There could be e-commerce or online purchase data. There could be behavioural data, so such as things like clickstream analytics, so which pages are being clicked on your website, and then conversion rates to what the actual outcome is from that. They could be machine or sensor data, so that could be anything generated by functional devices in the workplace or network connected appliances. Smart utility meters is an example. Anything that's monitored the processes of factory machinery, etc. That might be another area that's going to be from sensors, so sensors showing when things are on the line, when they're off the line. And then finally mobile data, so stuff that's generated and recorded in apps, for example, or updated in status or locations through GPS devices or web server logs, etc. And then there's the unstructured stuff, and that's really a catch-all phrase for anything that isn't easily sorted, indexed, or conforms to sort of database structures. It's usually person generated, often language based, and as such it tends to be less structured, harder to focus what they're talking about, and harder to categorize. Examples could be information contained in emails, audio from telephone conversations, video observations, social media, blog posts, things such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any other social media platform, and free written surveys, so stuff that isn't all question based, and feedback that's given in the same format. This data is unstructured. The structured data is really distinct and accountable. For example, you know when a purchase took place, you know what they bought, whereas the unstructured data tends to be more about opinions, emotions, relationships between customers and products, and it is harder to sift or harder to categorize so that you can understand and interpret it. But we'll discover in a minute there are some methods that technology can use to help us with that. And common ways technology can help in doing that is mining. So it can be data mining or text mining. Data mining is about using large and reviewing large amounts of data, searching for consistent patterns or relationships, and then technology can try and validate or interpret those patterns and help by finding interesting and interpretable trends in the data set that we might not spot. These trends create a picture and allow it to work out what's been happening, and then use predictive powers using previous data sets perhaps to work out where things might be going and what future values might be. So sales is an area predicting sales. It does it by doing things such as association, making a correlation between two items to determine a pattern. For example, you may note that when people buy coffee, they also buy cake. Yes, that's a simple one, and they're more complex than that, otherwise it wouldn't need technology. But that association can help. Classification, defining multiple attributes using identity items such as based on customers' age, income, and postcode, are they following similar patterns? And then sequential patterning, so analysing long-term data to find out where regular occurrences of similar events happen. So it might be that people are buying certain things at certain times of the year, as we always hear about retail getting it wrong. When the sun's out, then people are looking for ice cream, sun cream, t-shirts, and they need to increase their stock and be ready for that rush. Amazon's business model is a great example of where data mining using technology is a great power they have harnessed to improve their business, cross-selling and upselling of consumer items. So the descriptive power ensures that they know what their customers have bought in the past, and then they use the predictive power so that they can suggest products to people and perhaps produce more sales in the future. Whereas text mining is a different thing, because it's about the unstructured data that we mentioned before that's not so easy to deal with. It's person generated, it's less predictable, and therefore harder to interpret and deal with. But text mining technologies can help as they analyze much greater amounts of information, multiple documents, can sift through multiple words and zero in on key concepts, phrases, or word usage. So the technology might include doing things such as determining entities, so identifying and classifying key elements to create entities such as people, places, or organizations, using stuff it's identified in the text in predefined categories and speeding up and formalizing that process. Or it might be analyzing sentiment, identifying and categorizing expressed opinions, say from text or from audio, to try and determine a person's reaction. So it might be categorized as positive, negative, or neutral. So text mining can be useful, and it's one way we can improve the way the organisation tries to interpret and use the vast amounts of unstructured data that is now available on customers, stakeholders, but it's difficult. It could be useful in trying to work out the effectiveness of the latest email campaign, analysing responses to Twitter or social media campaigns or posts. And it's about trying to process information on customers' views, thoughts, and opinions so that we can use that to target the future plans, to try and avoid complaints and issues. So it helps inform our decisions. So it can assist in the way we sort and analyse our operational data, and possibly help us make sense of it so that we're not swamped and we can make better decisions. This reliance on all this digitally stored data brings in with its own concerns around things such as storage, access, security, and the need to ensure that we're doing all this in line with data protection. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But first, let's consider all the reasons why we should be careful with the data anyway. First of all, there's the integrity. This data may include information about our customers and our relationships with them, and they will rightly and hopefully feel that there is an element of trust in that relationship, and that trust is important to that customer relationship. We need to look after that information, and it is important that we can not only make the customer trust us, but that we can trust in the information being accurate as well. If we're going to use it for things like ordering and maintaining relationships with our customers. Then there's the commercial sensitivity. The data is about our customers and our suppliers, and it could be useful to competitors as they plan their strategy. So we need to protect it, and that will involve secure servers, regular backups, the monitoring of the quality of the data to ensure that the sensitive data does not fall into competitors' hands. Also must be aware of organizational processes relating to the data collection, the standardization, the collection, the storage, ensuring that individuals know where it is, that it's there, how to access it, the storage, the handling and the access, etc. And then finally, the implications of not meeting the legal requirements, so not adhering to data protection, which we'll start looking at in the next slide. So finally, let's spend some time talking about what the legal areas or reasons are for keeping our data protected and why we need to do it and what can happen, because that's what we've been talking about. The GDPR came in May 18 and replaced what we probably all remember is the 1998 Data Protection Act. It reinforced and tightened up the law around personal data and explicitly said what organizations can do with it, how they can collect it, how they can store it, and that's what we've been talking about in this session. There's resources at the end here about the ICO website, that's the Information Commissioner's Office, and a guide to GDPR, because there's a lot more detail in there. What I'm going to do is just go through it, brush strokes across the areas that are outlined in it that are really key and important to organizations storing data. Right, so briefly, the main areas that GDPR sort of highlighted were an expanded territorial reach. So the new GDPR now includes all companies based in and outside the EU. If they're outside the EU and they're targeting customers within the EU, then it's a one-stop shop, they're included, and there is no requirement for individual EU states to implement national legislation. The second point is it went into consent, and it said that consent about personal data must be given freely, and it must be specifically informed and given, not ambiguous. It's not a case of saying, oh, well, they didn't say they weren't prepared to give it consent. And then it talks about accountability and privacy by default. It says that organizations that are controlling data must demonstrate that they have data compliance, not just wait and see if they're not found compliant. They must maintain documentation that shows that they conduct and have impact assessment reports on the way they look at their data and the way they minimize possibilities of it defaulting against the GDPR. Next, it confirmed the role of data processors, so people who are dealing with the data, and it said that they had a direct obligation to implement technical and organizational measures to ensure that data was protected. That could involve having a data protection officer, and it also said that it wasn't just the people controlling data, it was the people dealing and processing the data who were responsible as well. It then went on to talk about a right to be forgotten, and it gave a significant change, which meant that the normal person on the street had a right to request their data to be forgotten, and that it should be complied with by the person holding that data. It then went on to talk about notification of data breaches and said that people who control the data must notify the data authorities as quickly as possible if they know there's been a breach and that data has been lost. And they had to do that within 72 hours. And then it said there were sanctions and higher fines. So fines could be up to 4% of the annual worldwide turnover of the company for breaches relating to data violations, and they could be fined up to other violations. They could be fined up to 2% of annual turnover. There is more on the increased sanctions in the video that is in the resources. So that's GDPR in a nutshell, and we have to make sure that we're complying with those things with all the data that we're keeping on our customers, our stakeholders, our suppliers. Right then, other than the activity that just about pulls everything together, a quick recap. The main aim was to understand how data is managed in the workplace, and we talked about what it was, what operational data was, how we do it, how we analyze it, and the importance of the integrity of that data and protecting it. And we've just talked about GDPR, and the activity involves looking at some videos, and there's more information about GDPR in the resources. And across the whole session, we've investigated how technology can impact on it, and you'll need to think about within your organization how technology could be implemented to improve data management, or where it has been used. So let's have a look at what to do next. So as we've reached the end of this unit, there's an end of unit assignment. But first, watch the ICO videos, bring yourself up to speed with GDPR if you're not familiar with it. And then you need to complete the unit assignment, which is 4 tasks covering the whole unit. Also start thinking and look at the evidence guidance sheet for Unit 311 on operational management. So that's where you've got to provide evidence that these things are being put into practice. So as you're doing assignment, just have a look at it and start thinking about where there is stuff within your organization that you can use. And then once you've uploaded your assignment and completed the knowledge check, you can move on to the next unit. Any questions or any doubts, talk to your tutor assessor.